Since I've been doing these videos, I've received a lot of messages and comments about sound design. So today, that's what we're going to talk about, how I go about sound design. Hey guys, Dilby here. Welcome back to the channel. Now, I'm not a sound design expert by any means. I've got a pretty fundamental understanding of it and the concepts behind it, and I've got a structure and process that I can go through to get some pretty basic sounds. After that, it's just a matter of kind of experimenting with different effects and things, trying things out to make it your own and see what works. So for me, the first step in sound design is having an idea of what it is that I'm trying to make. This is going to allow me to just listen and understand whether or not I'm on the right path as I'm going through the sound design process. Within the synth, the first decision is going to be to decide on the oscillator. What kind of bass sound are we using? A sine wave, a triangle, a saw, a square, something else, depending on the synth. Next, we're going to shape that oscillator sound. You can kind of think of it like sculpting sound, and the first step in that is going to be to set the shape of the amplification envelope, or basically shape the volume over time. Once we've done that, we're going to decide whether or not we need filtering. If so, what kind of filter, how much, and what kind of modulation we're going to use on that filter. Are we going to use an LFO or an envelope, and if so, how much? So from there, we're going to tweak things until it sounds about right, and then I'm going to use effects like delay, reverb, chorus, that type of thing, to sit it in the track and get it to where I want it to be. A big thing for me in this process, because I'm no expert, is that I go in with a clear idea of what I want, sound A, but if I come up with something cool, sound B or sound C, then I'm happy with that. So I try to have an open mind and go with whatever works. If you want to grab a copy of the Ableton Live project that we're working through today, then there's a link in the description to my Patreon where you can download the project files. All right, let's jump into Ableton and do some sound design. All right, so we're here in Ableton, and this is a little beat that I've put together for this project, kind of like a little deep housey type thing. Let's take a listen. So this is all going to be available on Patreon, link in the description if you want to go download it, including the melodic elements that we finish up with. The beat's all made with elements from my sample pack, Underground Shades of House. Link up here if you want to go grab that. So there's the kick, claps, hats. I've got one other loop which isn't on my sample pack. Just like a kind of background disco filler. Cool. And then a couple of percussion things here. Anyway, this is not about the beat, this is about the melodic elements. I also got some little vocal bits, just a rhythmic vocal shot and a little part of a loop with some echo on it. This is not about the vocals either. It's about sound design, and what I've done is I've prepared a couple of possible MIDI clips just to speed things up. So the format of this video is going to be a little bit different, maybe a little bit more live feeling. So I'm just going to kind of sound design this stuff on the fly. Like I talked about earlier, there's some kind of steps to the methodology of sound designing or creating a sound. So let's just have a quick listen to these. I'll show you quickly the MIDI clips. Boom, boom, boom. Boom. So a couple of different possibilities there that we could use. The key is F minor, which I've determined by the vocal and this string. So when we're designing this bass sound, the first thing that we're going to do is determine which kind of oscillator we're going to use. So let's just start with the first one. It's a nice simple patch. Nice simple sequence, sorry. And let's listen with the kick. Now let's go to the wavetable and we can see that's playing up around 300-400 Hertz. So that's not bass for starters, right? So what I'm going to do is bring that down. I might just transpose the whole synth, -24. So that's a good spot for our main oscillator. I like to put a sub underneath. And doing that allows you to kind of utilize the two other oscillators, oscillator 1 and 2, for the kind of tonality, and then the sub can just provide the sub. So what we're going to do here is listen through some oscillator shapes. We're on a sine wave currently. Let's go to a triangle. Almost kind of like a distorted sine wave, right? A sawtooth. a lot more harmonics. It's got that kind of buzzy characteristic, and then a square wave. The most kind of aggressive sound. So for the bass, I think we want to go for something subby, which could be actually just sine waves, but will probably be a sawtooth. So let's just start with a sawtooth, and then we can try some different notes. So now that we've determined the oscillator shape we're going to use, we want to set the amplification shape. So this is going to be the attack, the decay, the sustain, and the release of the sound. And that's going to be like the shape. If you look at it in a waveform, you can see what the amplification and the volume is doing. So let's listen to it now. So the release to my ear is kind of trailing on a little bit too long for a bass sound. So let's pull that in a bit. A bit more punchy, right? Now the sustain I think is a little bit long, so we can pull that down. What the sustain means is when you hold the note down, it's the volume at which it continues to play after the attack and decay has already played. Now I'll bring in the decay a little bit to make it a little bit more plucky. So that works for that pattern, but let's just figure out which pattern we're actually going to use. I didn't mention I've got an LFO tool on here doing some sidechain, because I'm going to sidechain the bass, so I may as well just put it on from the start. So I think I like this one actually, with the sustained notes playing like really low and then up an octave here. So let's go for that. And let's listen with the beat. So that grooves well with the beat. Back to our sound design. So I think this envelope is working well for that. It's got a bit of sustain because the notes are a bit longer, but it's got enough attack that they have some definition when the note actually plays. Now we want to set the filter frequency. I'm going to leave it on this 12 dB per octave filter, and we'll bring it down. I'll probably end up turning it to a 24 dB, which is a sharper cutoff. It lets through kind of less bleed, I would say, from the point that the filter's set at. And I'll add a little bit of resonance, which is kind of like putting a little EQ bell at the point of the cutoff. So in this case, it's 171 hertz. So you can see on here, when I just turn up the resonance, it creates this little peak. We don't want too much, something around 15 to 20. This helps to give a little bit more definition to the sound. Now let's take a listen when I change the filter type. You can see here in the spectrum of the EQ, it cuts off more sharply. You can see that kind of bleed that I was talking about. So I want the bass to be pretty subby, so I think we're going to go for a 24 dB. Now we want to shape the filter envelope. So we're going to use envelope 2 here. And for this, I want the sustain to be pretty low. What we're doing here is kind of setting the shape. It's similar to the amplification envelope, but this is going to be the envelope that modulates the filter. So if I go to the matrix, click on filter, add some envelope 2 to the filter frequency. So the reason I like Wavetable, especially for teaching this kind of stuff, is because you can actually see the movement in the filter. So this gives it that kind of plucky nature, right? The filter is setting the lowest point, or the most cut, or like the darkest sound. And then the modulation amount is setting how this envelope will interact with this and how far up it will go, how open the filter will become. And then the envelope sets the shape in which it will influence the filter. So when I turn this all the way up, and then if I bring the decay in, you'll hear it be more plucky. So I want a little bit of sustain, but not much. And I would never modulate the filter this much. I just want it to be kind of subtle and opening it up a little bit. Now that we've got some envelope on there, we can hear the effect of this resonance a lot more clearly. If I take it away, it loses this kind of bong sound. And as we turn it up, it starts to become like an acid pluck. So yeah, around 15 gives enough definition. I want a little bit more decay. I don't want it to be so plucky on this one. And let's take a little bit away again. No, maybe we'll leave it like that and we'll bring the filter down a bit more. Okay, that sounds good to me. Now, I'm going to add some sub to fill out the bottom end. So this is happening a bit too low. What I'm going to do is cut this off at 25. But we want the sub for when this octave plays. I'm going to turn the sub oscillator down. We want the main oscillator 1 to be the loudest oscillator. The sub is really kind of adding some reinforcement in the lows. Now I'll just turn off this oscillator 1 so we can hear what the sub is doing. Very low, right? Now if I add some of this tone, it's going to become a bit more harmonic. So this is basically adding some saturation to that sine, which brings it closer to something like a sawtooth. So that sounds good to me. You always want to be checking back in context with your track as well. Now let's turn on oscillator 1. So I'm going to actually cut away a bit more of this. I want it to be more subby. So that's sounding about right for me. It's kind of grooving quite nicely. In the amplification, I might just turn up the sustain a little bit. We've got some quite long notes in this MIDI, so we do want to have enough sustain so that we can hear the sustain of those. So there's a couple more things we can try. Let's have a listen to those oscillators now and see how they sound when they're affected by the settings that we've added to the synth. Sine wave. Pretty cool actually. Let's try a triangle. Like that too. Sawtooth's got a lot more character, a lot more harmonics. Now let's try the square. Almost like a UK garage type sound, right? So then we've also got the options of trying in between sounds. So let's try a square saw. So I quite like that kind of subby saw sound. As we've got less harmonics from the oscillator, I can open the filter a bit so we can hear the synth a bit more. Let's listen to that with the kick and the bass. Now, we've always got the option of adding a second oscillator. I don't think we will use it in this case, but let's just see how that sounds. So this first oscillator is set to 0, so let's add it up 12 semitones. We'll put it onto a saw so we can hear it. And 24 semitones. Now the really nice kind of harmonic sounds are going to come when we put it to like a perfect fifth, which is 7. 7. So that sounds a bit loud, so I'll turn it down, maybe 5 dB. So we want it to be subtle, right? It's without. So we could also try it up an octave. So an octave is 12 semitones, plus 7 is going to be 19. So let's try that. It sounds interesting, but it's not really what I'm going for. So let's undo that. I do like that, but I think it's kind of putting a bit much emphasis on the bass. So let's just leave it at this nice sub. Cool, that's sounding good to me. I'll just turn this to mono, as we don't need it to be polyphonic. We're only playing one note at a time. And this will mean that if the release carries on, it's actually going to stop the note that's playing when it starts a new one. Cool, so I'm happy with that sub bass. All right, so I've got a MIDI here for a pluck, basically. So this is going to be something that I use in my tracks a lot. So we could use wavetable, but actually I might try an analog. It's a bit more of a simple synthesizer, but it has a noise oscillator instead of the sub oscillator. So we're going to go for sawtooths. This is already set up, and we're going to tune this one down an octave, but I'm going to turn it off for now. You'll see in the MIDI here, I'm actually playing a chord. So let's play that. And we've got this one as well, playing in a different position. Maybe this one's better. It works a bit better with the bass line. So we can see in the MIDI, it's sitting around here. And the other one, the chord would be playing on here. We could also try it in this position as there's some space. So let me just duplicate this, move it over. Not really as catchy in the groove, but we can try it. We'll start with this one, and then we can experiment with the different placements once we've got the sound sorted. So I'll bring this one down an octave. So that's sounding about right. Again, we're going to shape the amplification. This is going to be a pluck, so I want it to be more plucky. I'm going to bring the release in, sustain down. We can also do it here, or with this shape. So you can hear there's not much release on that, but I'm going to add reverb to it, which is going to help the sound fit into the mix and decay on a bit longer, but in a more natural sounding way. I'll just try it with the reverb so you can hear. You can hear it kind of helps the sound to sit nicer, sounds more natural, but we don't have the release carrying on. We're making a pluck, so it's going to be sharp. Now we want to set the filter. Something like that, a little bit of resonance. Just a bit to emphasize that filter. We could try it at 12 dB. Now let's shape the filter envelope. It's going to be very similar to the amplification envelope, and we just set the filter amount here. So let me set that to 0. So that's the kind of sound that I'm going for. Let's hear that with the reverb. We can bring the filter down a little bit more. Maybe a bit more decay. Let's hear it in context. Cool, so that's the foundation of our pluck. Now, what I'm going to do is add a second oscillator now, and let's try that up a higher octave, and we can see that this implies that it's going to filter 1. So it's already going to be filtered and affected by this filter and this filter envelope, and that's what we want. So that sounds nice. It's adding in another octave above, and we've got this power chord playing, so that's cool. Now what we can do here, just to spice it up a little bit, is add a tiny bit of detune. Just bringing that one up 0.02, this one down 0.02. That's just going to shift those so they're not perfectly tuned to one another. Now I'm going to bring the second oscillator down in volume quite a bit. Now, if we wanted it to be a bit more of a sustained chord, we could add a bit more sustain in the amplification. Let's see what that sounds like. Somewhere in the middle there sounds pretty cool. Now let's go and tweak this filter envelope. Sounds pretty cool to me. Now, what I like to have is a bit of unison. So this is going to add more voices and detune those voices, which gives a kind of chorusy type effect. So you can see that has a bit more character than without. Let's add a little bit of delay and see if we can set it into the mix. This is just sending to a 8th note dotted ping pong. This is just part of my template. I'll link a video up here where you can check out the template and download it from Patreon. Cool, so I mean that's working pretty well. Let's try out these different patterns, different placements that I've got. Actually, this one here has a good question answer with the vocal, doesn't it? So what I could do is just bring this down in volume a little bit and bring this vocal up in volume a little bit. Cool. And then if we want to make this pattern a bit more interesting, we could duplicate it and then maybe add something like this. We could also try combining some of these. So like this one sounded quite cool. So we basically grab that, put it here, put another one here. Let's have a listen. That's a bit much. Take it away. What we could actually do is have that, turn this off. So now we're kind of having this question and answer with the vocal that happens here, which is this one, this vocal here. So I'm pretty happy with that. So let's move on. We've got this little sequence that I made. So let's see if either of these work with what we've got going on now. Okay, so I think it's not quite working, but I can duplicate this, mute these notes here. And I think that's working, just a more simplified version. I could try putting this over 2 bars and let's duplicate it. We'll just turn off the first one. All right, that's pretty cool. Now let's do some sound design on it. What kind of oscillator do we want? I might just play one of these other patterns for the sound design process, as we're going to be able to hear it better. So the sine waves gives a kind of bell type sound. This is like a very digital kind of sound with the triangle wave. I think maybe square or triangle could be interesting. Now if we look at where our plucks are happening, in this kind of low mid area. So for this, we're going to have our frequencies happening around here. And that gives space for the vocal to be happening around here. So let's try. Okay, and let's shape it. We're going to make this quite plucky. It sounds good to me. Now let's set the filter. So this is going to be like an arpeggio type sound. A little bit of resonance, maybe quite a bit of resonance. Cool, I like that. Let's try. So it's a nice kind of subtle melody. Bring it up a little bit. I'm going to add some modulation to the filter frequency. Envelope 2, very plucky. And hit the matrix, filter frequency, envelope 2. So let's take a listen to that in context. So that's sounding pretty cool. Let's try it with another oscillator. We'll go again with the triangle, and this time I'm going to tune this up by 3 semitones and see what that sounds like. This is really just experimentation. Not cool. Let's try 5. Interesting. Let's try 7. Cool. Let's try 12. It's probably more what I'm looking for. So let me bring this one down a bit. I want the fundamental to be oscillator 1. Okay, so that sounds cool to me. Let's make it a bit more interesting, adding some filter drive, the MS-20 algorithm. Sounds good to me. And let's try some unison. I like this shimmer. It gives a bit of randomness in the panorama. As this is like a subtle supporting element, I'm not too worried about how defined it is. As long as we can hear it a bit, it's going to be good. Now, I want it to be a bit more spacey and a bit more atmospheric. I'm just going to cut out the lows with this, and I'm going to add echo. Echo is great because it's got a delay and a reverb built in. So we'll bring this back to something like 25% dry wet, and let's set this to 16th notes ping pong and have a listen. I'll just adjust this, bring up the filter a little bit. We can see the filter here. So I might set that down and then use this reverb. So that's a bit nicer to my ears. I'm going to cut out a bit more of the highs. I want it to be subtle. I'm going to bring it down to 20, 19, 20, and a bit more feedback. See what that sounds like. So before the echo, with the echo. Okay, cool. Now let's listen in context with our MIDI. Okay, so I can hear something. A combination of this one and this one might work quite well. So I'm going to duplicate this and turn on these notes here. Let's see if it works, but if so, this will provide some differentiation between this 2-bar loop and this 2-bar loop, which extends the loop and kind of gives it a bit more longevity. Don't need that one. So subtle difference, but it's different. All right, so I hope that was interesting for you. I hope you could follow along and take away some of the underlying ideas and my approach to sound design. I try to do it in a kind of step-by-step way, but then add in some kind of experimentation and see what comes out. Try to have an idea in mind of what I'm going for, but be open to whatever happens. And I find that's the way I get the best results. If you want to grab this project with all the samples, MIDI, all the patches I've designed, then you can jump over to Patreon. There's a link in the description, and you can download this project and all the other projects that I make for videos on the channel. Alright guys, there you go. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you're able to get a kind of fundamental idea of the sound design process that I go through when I'm coming up with my sounds. If you're looking for another video to watch after this, then check out this one I did on the 5 most fundamental bass lines in Underground House and Techno. It's a banger. Anyway, that's it from me today. I'll catch you next time. Peace.